We will start then with Boromir. There is very little of modern heroism in this character. He is steeped in nobility and high-mindedness. Boromir reminds us of the Roman conception of the hero. He has traces of the Greek hero in his desire for glorious victory in battle, but it is his love of his city, Gondor, that strongly reminds us of the Roman hero. He begins with good intentions. He wants to protect his city from the forces of Sauron. The flaw in his plan is that he is utilitarian. That is, he is willing to use any means to do so. His understandable pride in his city turns into a devastating personal pride, which leads him to believe he can wield the ring without being affected by it. During the Council of Elrond, Boromir proudly states, "Why should we not think that the great ring has come into our hands to serve us in the very hour of need? The men of Gondor are valiant, and they will never submit, but they may be beaten down. Valor needs first strength and then a weapon. Let the ring be your weapon, take it and go forth to victory." Boromir's frustration and the council's unwillingness to help him and his people spurs him to make his own plans. He intends, eventually, to persuade Frodo to go with him to Gondor and help his city. Unfortunately, the ring manipulates Boromir. It turns his desire to defend the city into a twisted desire to seize control for himself. Boromir's pride and self-reliance, shown in his initial unwillingness to swear loyalty to Aragorn, overcome his ability to see the dangers of the ring. It is at the very moment that he chooses himself over the good of the community, the city, Frodo, and the Fellowship, that he falls. Boromir's tragedy as a hero is that he begins as such a wonderful example of a classical hero. He shows the virtues of a Roman and Greek hero who was laboring courageously to defend his city by fighting on the battlefield. He is legitimately frustrated by the lack of military and tactical support he receives at Elrond's council. Initially, Boromir sees the ring as a weapon that can be used against Sauron to defend Gondor and Middle-earth. Boromir starts with a clear idea of the greater good, but does not notice when he places his own desires on the same level. It is this confusion and presumption of the strength of his self that causes his downfall and his attack on Frodo. In his last moments, though, Boromir admits to and apologizes for his attempts to wrest the ring from Frodo. And as a final heart-wrenching gesture, Boromir swears his allegiance and fealty to Aragorn, the rightful king. We come then to Aragorn. Aragorn is one of the most frustrating portrayals of a composite hero in Lord of the Rings. Aragorn is a man, but he's also a Dunedain ranger and the heir of Isildur, which grants him long life and kingship of Gondor, respectively. Because of Tolkien's love of applicability over formal allegory, Aragorn's heroism and character does not neatly fit into any category. He very clearly has marks of a classical hero about him. He is a great leader of men, he achieves incredible victories on the battlefield, and will eventually take his rightful place as king of the city of Gondor, satisfying the traits of the Greek and the Roman heroes. In addition to these outward and classical heroic traits, Aragorn also bears some marks of the modern hero. He feels the weight of Isildur's sins and wants to atone for them. Aragorn worries that he will be as weak as Isildur, given that much power. Aragorn tries to keep a safe distance from Frodo and the ring. He fears the temptations that the ring brings. Of course, he journeys all over Middle-earth, assembling armies against Sauron, but his struggle is predominantly internal. Aragorn's internal struggle to accept his kingliness is mirrored in his initial hesitation and eventual mastering of the Palantir. The importance of Aragorn's struggle with himself and his demons cannot be understated. The last book of Lord of the Rings is called The Return of the King for that very reason. Aragorn's quest is an internal journey to accept and return to his kingly identity. The destruction of the ring is arguably as important as Aragorn's acceptance of his birthright as King of Gondor. Aragorn is a giant mix of divine and human illusions and parallels. He has Isildur's blood and the weakness of men in him, but it will eventually take his place as rightful king. He is a unique combination of the classical awareness of the common good and the modern struggle of an as-yet unresolved or unactualized self. Tolkien also gives Aragorn some undeniably Christological moments, especially when Aragorn tries to atone for the sins of Isildur. The fact that Aragorn humbly accepts his role at the end of the book, even though the role is far from humble, suggests that Aragorn is the first demonstration we have seen of a complex Christian hero. He has the aforementioned traits of the classical hero, infused with the Christian idea for the love of the community, even if it means temporarily denying the wishes of the self. It is Aragorn who, so far, shows the best combination of a composite hero with classical and modern heroic traits imbued with Christian heroism. We have, for the time being, sufficiently addressed and presented the different kinds of heroism of the men in Lord of the Rings. It is time to shift our focus to the hobbits, Frodo and Sam. We have the ring-bearer, Frodo Baggins. Because of the hobbit's simplicity and innocence, we may not suspect Frodo of the layered heroism we find in the men of Middle-earth. However, Frodo very quickly proves us wrong. The ring, a physical manifestation of sin and corruption, works its power on Frodo throughout the course of the quest. His greatest fight is not just the external journey across Middle-earth, but an internal struggle to keep himself above the power of the ring. Frodo's quest is twofold: the external quest to destroy the ring, and the internal quest to keep himself from being destroyed by the ring. Frodo is the most remarkable modern hero in the story, for the internal struggle with himself and the ring becomes the priority. Frodo's quest, since so much of it is an internal struggle, shares those characteristics with the modern hero. During the fracturing of the Fellowship, Frodo puts on the ring to escape Boromir and ends up wrestling with the ring. Quote, "The two powers strove in him. For a moment, perfectly balanced between their piercing points, he writhed, tormented. Suddenly he was aware of himself again. Frodo, neither the voice nor the eye, free to choose." End quote. Frodo suffers from this internal war from the moment he decides to become the ring-bearer, and the war grows worse as he gets closer to Mount Doom. He walked, Tolkien says, like one who carries a load, the weight of which is ever increasing. Frodo, as one of the most prominent heroes in the story, deals with a certain degree of failure. He does so with a superhuman or super-hobbit effort. Make it to the brink of Mount Doom to destroy the ring, but at the climax of his journey, he chooses to put the ring on instead. It takes the forceful intervention of grace, in the unsavory form of Gollum, to get the ring off of Frodo and into the fire. Although Frodo makes many selfless choices throughout the saga, he falters at a critical moment. Frodo is a predominantly modern hero, with almost no traces of the classical hero in him. He rarely takes up the sword, and pointedly refuses to fight during Merry and Pippin's battle against Saruman for the Shire. The one important trait to include is the aforementioned Christian trait of daily courage and endurance. This kind of courage is not the dramatic kind one might see on the battlefield, but the simple act of moving forward each day, inching closer to Mount Doom. Frodo has a heavy dose of modern heroism, with a streak of the endurance of Christian heroism in him. We must note that although much of Frodo's journey is internal, he bears both internal and external scars. The combination is almost poetic, as we see shortly after the ring is destroyed. Quote, "There was Frodo, pale and worn, and yet himself again, and in his eyes there was peace now, neither strain of will, nor madness, nor any fear. His burden was taken away. His master had been saved. He was himself again, he was free." And then Sam caught sight of the maimed and bleeding hand. End quote. We are left, at last, with Samwise Gamgee. He spends some of the storyline in Frodo's shadow as a stolid but sometimes bumbling sidekick. However, when Frodo and Sam are separated from the Fellowship and embark on their own storyline, we begin to see Sam's true worth. Sam rescues Frodo from a number of dangerous situations in addition to becoming a capable warrior. While Frodo is kidnapped by the orcs and imprisoned in Barad-dûr, Sam is the temporary guardian of the ring and of the sword's sting. He defeats the great spider Shelob, and in a sense, defeats the remaining orcs at Barad-dûr. When he thinks that Shelob has killed Frodo, Sam must accept the temporary role of ring-bearer. He is afraid of putting himself forward, as he says. Quote, "But you haven't put yourself forward. You've been put forward. And as for not being the right and proper person, why, Mr. Frodo wasn't, nor Mr. Bilbo. They didn't choose themselves." End quote. Sam's reaction to his new role as ring-bearer after Frodo exemplifies the Christian courage of humility. While Sam focuses on the more physical and external struggles of his quest, he does not escape internal temptation from the ring. Quote, "As Sam stood there, Even though the ring was not on him, but hanging by its chain around his neck, he felt himself enlarged, as if he were robed in a huge distorted shadow of himself. A vast and ominous threat halted upon the walls of Mordor. Already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to the overthrow of Barad-dûr. And then all the clouds rolled away, and the white sun shone, and at his command the Vale of Gorgoroth became a garden of flowers and trees, and brought forth fruit. He had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own, and all this could be. In that hour of trial, it was his love of his master that helped most to hold him firm, but also deep down in him lived still unconquered his plain hobbit sense. He knew in the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden. The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm. His own hands to use, not the hands of others to command." End quote. Sam not only overcomes his brief but intense internal struggle, but he physically carries Frodo for the last leg of their journey up to Mount Doom, and does everything in his power to persuade Frodo to destroy the ring. As Frodo grows weaker near Mount Doom, Sam says, quote, "I'll get there if I leave everything but my bones behind, and I'll carry Mr. Frodo up myself if it breaks my back and my heart." End quote. Even though Sam had been tempted by the ring when he had to guard it, he flatly rejects the false promises of the ring. He chooses instead to return the ring to Frodo when it is time. Sam's role for much of Lord of the Rings is fighting Frodo's external battles for him, so that Frodo has more time to fight his internal battles. Sam is not oblivious to his own internal battles, they are simply easier for him to defeat. His one moment of temptation with the ring is over quite quickly, and he emerges as master of himself. Caldecott tells us, quote, "The hobbits are humble, and Sam is the humblest of hobbits, a servant without pretensions or ambitions. For him to leave the Shire out of love for his master requires a great sacrifice. The plans of the wise and the fate of Middle-earth are never his concern. He only knows he has to do his bit and help his master, however hopeless the task may seem. The gardener and healer of gardens becomes a king, or at least a mayor." End quote. Sam's story does not end in battle, though. It ends with a return to the Shire and to his family. Sam fights not only for Frodo, but for the domestic realm and the Shire. The triumph of the work is not to be found in success in war, but in the restoration of the self in the community. Frodo, as the most prevalent example of modern heroism in Lord of the Rings, succeeds in almost every moment except for the most important one. I would argue that Frodo's action of putting on the ring in Mount Doom is a demonstration of Tolkien's